The ship was dying, and everyone on board knew it. Commander Jack watched the warning lights flash across every panel on the bridge while his crew worked to keep them alive. The navigation system had failed 3 hours ago somewhere near the nebula, and now they were drifting through space that no human had ever seen before. Sam Turner pulled hard on the manual controls, but the ship would not respond. He was a good pilot and had flown through asteroid fields and solar storms, but he had never dealt with a complete system failure like this one. The engines were working, but something else had taken control of their direction. Kate Bradley looked up from her communication station with fear in her eyes. She told Jack that something was pulling them toward a structure about 200 kilometers ahead. It was massive, and it was not in any database she could access. Jack moved to the viewport and saw it for himself. A space station, the size of a small moon, sat in the darkness between stars. It was covered in sharp angles and glowing symbols that hurt his eyes if he looked at them too long. Danny Price climbed up from the engineering deck covered in grease and frustration. He reported that the engines were fine, but a tractor beam had locked onto their hull, and there was nothing he could do to break free. They were being dragged toward that station whether they wanted to go or not. Jack gathered his senior crew on the bridge. Besides Sam and Kate and Danny, there was Dr. Cole, who served as their medical officer, and Lieutenant, who handled security and survival training. Ben Carter was also there, standing near the door with his arms crossed. Ben was the security chief, and he had a way of staying calm when everything around him was falling apart. Jack told them the truth. They did not know where they were or who was pulling them in. They had no weapons that could fight a station that size and no way to escape the beam. Their only option was to land and hope that whoever lived there was willing to talk before shooting. The horizon's edge touched down in a docking bay that could have held 100 ships their size. The air outside reeked as breathable, but filled with chemicals that should have made them sick. Jack ordered everyone to gear up anyway, and they walked down the ramp into the unknown. The corridor leading from the bay was wide enough for a building to fit through. The walls were made of some dark metal that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Strange sounds echoed from somewhere deeper inside. They sounded like screams mixed with grinding machinery. Kate worked on her portable translator as they walked. She was picking up transmissions from all over the station, but none of them matched any language in the human database. Whatever species lived here had never made contact with Earth. They walked for nearly 20 minutes before they found the source of the sounds. A massive door stood at the end of the corridor, covered in symbols that glowed red and orange. Ben stepped forward and put his hand on the surface. The door recognized his touch somehow and slid open with a grinding noise that made everyone flinch. What they saw inside made them stop breathing for a moment. A circular chamber stretched out before them, larger than any stadium on Earth. Dozens of platforms rose from the floor at different heights, and on each platform sat creatures that looked like nightmares given physical form. Some were covered in scales that dripped with something wet and dark. Others had too many limbs or too many eyes or bodies made of crystal and fire. One creature near the center looked like a giant insect, standing on 4 legs with mandibles that could bite through steel. Every single one of them turned to look at the humans standing in the doorway. The chamber fell silent. Jack felt the weight of all those alien eyes pressing down on him, but he did not step back. He had learned long ago that showing fear to predators only made them hungry. A creature covered in thick reptilian scales rose from its platform and pointed one clawed finger at the humans. Its voice came through Kate's translator as a deep rumble that shook the floor. It demanded to know how soft creatures from an unknown system had breached the security of the council chambers. It wanted to know if they were spies or assassins or simply fools who had wandered into the wrong part of the galaxy. Jack stepped forward and spoke clearly. He introduced himself and his crew. He explained that their navigation had failed and that they had been pulled in by the station's tractor beam. They were not spies or assassins. They were explorers who had lost their way. The reptilian creature laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. It said that explorers did not survive in this part of space. It said that the beings gathered here were the representatives of the Council, and that only the strongest species in the galaxy were permitted to know of their existence. Intruders were dealt with quickly and permanently. Jack noticed that his crew was still breathing normally despite standing in the chamber for several minutes. He asked Kate about the air quality. She checked her scanner, and her eyes went wide. The atmosphere in this room was toxic. It contained compounds that should have killed an unprotected human in seconds. The giant insect creature at the center of the chamber rose to its full height. It introduced itself as High Arbiter, and it had noticed the same thing. It asked how the humans were still standing. It asked what kind of respiratory system could filter out the ceremonial gases that filled the council chamber. Stepped forward and answered honestly. Human lungs were adaptable. The compounds in the air were unpleasant but not immediately lethal to their biology. She explained that humans had evolved on a planet with volcanic eruptions and forest fires and industrial pollution. Their bodies had learned to handle bad air. The chamber erupted in noise. Every creature was speaking at once. Raised one of her limbs and silence fell again. She stared at the humans with eyes that reflected no light. She said that no species outside the classification had ever survived the council atmosphere for more than a few seconds. She said that these soft-looking creatures had just changed everything the council thought they knew about the galaxy. The reptilian creature demanded their execution anyway. The request. She said the humans would be detained and evaluated. If they were truly from a then, they had a right to stand before the council. If they were not then, they would die during the testing anyway. Ben leaned close to Jack and whispered that he did not like the sound of testing. Jack whispered back that he did not either, but it was better than immediate execution. They would survive the tests. They would survive because that was what humans did. Guards made of living shadow escorted them from the chamber. As they walked, Kate managed to download a partial translation matrix from the station's network. She told Jack that meant a planet so hostile that evolving intelligence on its surface was considered nearly impossible. Jack smiled despite the situation. He told his crew that if these aliens thought their planets were tough, then they had never seen Earth. They had never dealt with humans, and they had no idea what was coming. The detention cells were actually comfortable compared to what Jack had expected. Each crew member had their own room with a sleeping platform and basic facilities. The walls were made of the same dark metal as the corridors, but at least they were not hanging in chains or floating in acid tanks. Given what they had seen of the council members, that had seemed like a real possibility. On the second day, the evaluations began. Dr. Cole was taken first. Two guards who looked like walking boulders with faces escorted her to a medical facility deep within the station. A crystalline being named was waiting for her there. Its body was made of what looked like living glass, and light pulsed through its form whenever it spoke. Explained that it was the council's chief scientist, and that it needed to understand human biology before the evaluation could proceed. It asked to provide data about Earth and its conditions. Saw no reason to lie, so she told the truth. She described Earth's gravity, which was stronger than 60% of inhabited worlds in known space. She described the atmosphere, which contained a gas called oxygen, that was technically a corrosive agent capable of starting fires and rusting metal. She talked about the bacteria and viruses that lived in every corner of the planet, competing with larger life forms in an endless war of infection and immunity. Listened without interrupting. When finished, it was silent for a long time. Then it accused her of lying. It said that no intelligent species could evolve on a planet with those conditions. It said that the radiation levels alone from Earth's sun would cause genetic damage within generations. Pulled up the medical files stored on her portable device. She showed the data directly. She showed it the cellular repair mechanisms that humans had evolved to fix radiation damage. She showed it the immune system that fought off thousands of microscopic invaders every single day. She showed it the healing factor that allowed humans to recover from wounds that would kill most species. Studied the data for hours. By the end, it was no longer accusing her of lying. It was asking how humans had survived long enough to build spaceships. Meanwhile was being evaluated in a different part of the station. His test was simpler. The council wanted to see basic survival skills. Had grown up camping in the mountains with his father and grandfather. He had learned to live off the land before he learned to drive a car. When the evaluators dropped him in a simulated wilderness environment filled with toxic plants and hostile creatures, he felt almost at home. He started a fire using friction between two pieces of wood. The evaluators had never seen this technique. On their world's, fire was something that happened during disasters, not something that could be created with bare hands. Built a shelter from fallen branches and leaves. He found water and purified it by boiling it over his fire. He fashioned a spear from a sharp rock and a straight stick, and used it to hunt one of the smaller creatures wandering the simulation. When he was pulled out of the test, after 6 hours, he learned that he had broken several records. The average time for council species to create fire without tools was 3 days. Had done it in 20 minutes. The evaluators did not know whether to be impressed or terrified. Kate Bradley faced a different kind of test. The council wanted to understand human psychology, so they asked her questions about Earth's history. Kate had always loved history, so she answered honestly. She told them about the ice ages, when humans had survived temperatures that would freeze most carbon-based life. She told them about the plagues that had killed huge portions of the population, only for the survivors to rebuild stronger than before. She told them about the wars that humans had fought against each other for thousands of years. The evaluator asking the questions was a creature that looked like a floating mass of tentacles with a single eye in the center. It stopped her when she mentioned the wars. It asked her to clarify. It wanted to know if humans actually fought wars against their own species. Kate confirmed this. She explained that humans had been fighting each other since before recorded history. They fought over land and resources and ideas, and sometimes just because they were angry. They had developed weapons that could destroy entire cities, and they had used those weapons more than once. The tentacle creature made a sound that the translator interpreted as disbelief. It said that predator species sometimes competed for territory, but actual organized warfare against one's own kind was considered a sign of severe psychological damage. It asked if all humans were this violent. Kate thought about the question carefully. She said that humans were capable of great violence, but also great kindness. They built hospitals and schools alongside their weapons factories. They created art and music while their armies marched. Humans contained contradictions that even they did not fully understand. The evaluator recorded her answers and dismissed her without further comment. Ben Carter's evaluation was physical. They wanted to test human endurance and pain tolerance. The test involved running on a machine that increased its speed every few minutes. Most council species collapsed after an hour. Ben ran for 4 hours before the evaluators stopped the test out of concern for the equipment. His heart rate had increased, but he was not showing signs of giving up. They tried other tests: temperature extremes, mild electric shocks, sleep deprivation. Ben handled all of them with a calm that disturbed the evaluators more than any display of rage could have. When they asked him how he endured so much, he simply shrugged. He told them that he had grown up in a rough neighborhood where showing weakness got you killed. He had served in military conflicts where soldiers went days without sleep or food. He said that compared to some of the things he had survived in his life, their tests felt almost relaxing. The evaluators did not know what to make of this. On the 5th day, the crew was brought back together, and several other scientists presented their findings to the full council. The chamber was packed with creatures who wanted to hear the results. Spoke first. It said that the data was conclusive. Earth met every criterion for classification and exceeded most of them by significant margins. The planet's gravity was crushing. Its atmosphere was corrosive. Its ecosystem was a constant war between predators and prey and parasites and disease. The fact that intelligent life had evolved there at all was statistically improbable. But humans had not just evolved. They had thrived. They had spread across their entire planet and then reached into space. They had developed technology and culture, and the ability to work together in groups larger than any council species could manage. High Arbiter listened to the report without expression. When it was finished, she turned to look at Jack and his crew standing in the center of the chamber. She said that the evaluation was complete. Earth was classified as a Category 9, which was the highest rating the Council used. Humans had proven themselves worthy of further consideration. But consideration was not membership. For that, the humans would need to pass one more test, the trial of dominance. The reptilian creature called rose from his platform with a smile full of teeth. He announced that he would invoke the ancient right of challenge. He would face a human champion in single combat. If the human won, they would earn a seat on the council. If the human lost, they would die and their ship would be destroyed as a warning to others. Jack looked at his crew. Ben was already stepping forward before anyone could stop him. He told Jack that he had been waiting for this part. He said that talking and testing was fine, but this was something he understood. Combat was simple. You either won or you did not. The combat arena was located in the lowest level of the station. It was a circular pit carved from solid rock with seating rising up on all sides like an ancient coliseum. Thousands of creatures had gathered to watch. Word had spread through the station that a new species was challenging for membership, and everyone wanted to see what these soft-looking beings could do. Ben Carter stood at one end of the arena wearing nothing but his standard uniform pants. The rules of the trial were clear. No weapons, no armor, no technology of any kind, just two beings fighting with whatever nature had given them. Stood at the other end, and he was terrifying to look at. The reptilian was 9 feet tall and covered in scales that looked thick enough to stop bullets. His claws were each the length of combat knives, and his tail ended in a bony club that could shatter concrete. He had been the champion of his species for over 200 years, and he had never lost a challenge. Jack watched from the stands with the rest of the crew. Kate had her hand pressed against her mouth and was gripping his arm hard enough to leave bruises. Danny kept muttering calculations about mass and force, and none of them were encouraging. High Arbiter rose to announce the rules. The fight would continue until one combatant yielded or was unable to continue. Killing was permitted but not required. The winner would have their claim recognized by the full council. Laughed when she finished. He shouted across the arena that the human should yield now and save himself the pain. He said that he had crushed beings twice the human size without breaking a sweat. He said that this fight would last less than a minute. Ben did not respond. He just rolled his shoulders and settled into a fighting stance that his grandfather had taught him decades ago. His grandfather had been a boxer in the old days before the sport went professional and soft. He had taught Ben that the most dangerous fighters were not the biggest or the strongest. They were the ones who refused to quit. Dropped her arm and the fight began. Charged across the arena with speed that seemed impossible for something his size. His claws were extended and aimed at Ben's chest. One hit would tear the human apart. Ben did not try to block or meet the charge head-on. He stepped to the side at the last possible second and lets momentum carry him past. As the reptilian went by, Ben landed a solid punch to his kidney area. The scales absorbed most of the impact, but Ben felt something give underneath. Spun around with his tail swinging like a weapon. Ben dropped flat, and the bony club passed over his head close enough to ruffle his hair. He rolled away and came back to his feet just as launched another attack. The next 3 minutes were brutal. had power and natural weapons, but he fought like a predator. He attacked in straight lines, expecting his prey to freeze or flee. Ben did neither. He moved constantly, circling around the arena, making turn and chase him. Every time attacked, Ben would dodge and counter. A punch to the throat, a kick to the knee, an elbow to the eye. None of the hits did serious damage through those scales, but they added up. Small injuries accumulated into larger problems. The crowd began to murmur. They had expected this to be over quickly. Instead, the human was still standing and was breathing harder than anyone had ever seen. Caught Ben with a backhand that sent him flying across the arena. Ben hit the stone wall hard enough to crack it and slid to the ground. Blood ran from his nose and his left arm hung at a bad angle. Something was broken. Kate screamed his name. Jack started to stand but pulled him back down. This was Ben's fight. Interfering would only make things worse. Walked slowly toward the fallen human. He was limping slightly from the kicks Ben had landed on his legs, but victory was clearly in his grasp. He told Ben that he had fought well for a soft creature. He said that Ben should feel honored to die by the claws of a true warrior. Ben laughed. Blood sprayed from his lips, but he laughed anyway. He pushed himself up from the ground using his good arm. He got one knee under him, then the other. Then he stood. The crowd fell silent, stared at the human in disbelief. He asked how Ben was still standing. He said that blow should have shattered every bone in the human's body. Ben spat blood onto the arena floor. He said that he had been hit harder than that in bar fights back home. He said that was strong, but he telegraphed every attack like a beginner. He said that this fight was far from over. Something changed in his eyes then. The confidence faded, and something that looked almost like fear took its place. He had fought hundreds of opponents in this arena. Some had been faster than him. Some had been stronger, but none of them had ever gotten back up after taking a hit like that. The reptilian charged again, but there was desperation in his movements now. Ben waited until the last second, then ducked under the swinging claws and drove his shoulder into his midsection. The impact would have broken a normal human's collarbone, but Ben had learned to tackle from playing football as a teenager. Stumbled backward off balance for the first time in the fight. Ben followed up with a combination of punches aimed at the soft tissue around the reptilian's eyes. One punch got through and roared in pain as blood began to flow down his face. The next 2 minutes were the longest of everyone's life. Ben took more hits. His ribs cracked. His face swelled until one eye was completely closed, but he kept fighting. Every time knocked him down, he got back up. Every time the reptilian thought the fight was over, Ben proved him wrong. Finally made a mistake born from exhaustion and frustration. He overextended on a claw strike and left his neck exposed. Ben did not hesitate. He stepped inside the attack, wrapped his good arm around the reptilian's throat, and locked in a chokehold that his grandfather had called the sleeper. Thrashed and clawed at Ben's arm, leaving deep gouges that bled freely. But Ben held on. He squeezed, and cutting off blood flow to the brain. The reptilian's movements became weaker. His claws stopped digging. His massive body began to sag. After 30 seconds, collapsed to his knees. After 60 seconds, he tapped the ground 3 times. He yielded. Ben released the hold and stepped back. He could barely stand. His body was a map of injuries that would take months to heal, but he was alive and he had won. The arena exploded with noise. Some creatures were cheering while others made sounds of disbelief or outrage. High Arbiter silenced them all with a gesture. She looked down at the 2 combatants, was being helped away by his attendants while Ben stood alone, covered in blood, both his own and his opponent's. She announced that the trial was complete. The human had won through endurance and adaptability rather than brute strength. She declared that humanity had earned their seat on the council. Jack climbed down into the arena and caught Ben just as his legs finally gave out. Was right behind him, already running scans and calling for medical supplies. Ben looked up at his commander and managed a weak smile. He said that he told them he could handle it. Then he passed out. Ben spent 2 weeks recovering in the station's medical bay. The council's doctors were amazed at how quickly his body healed itself. Bones that should have taken months to mend were knitting back together in days. Wounds that would have permanently disabled most species were already fatting into scars. Worked alongside the alien doctors and learned more about comparative biology in those 2 weeks than she had in her entire career. She discovered that humans had one of the most aggressive healing factors in the known galaxy. Their bodies treated injury as a temporary problem to be solved rather than a permanent condition to be endured. While Ben recovered, the rest of the crew was given full access to the Council's archives. This was the privilege of member species, and Jack intended to use it. He needed to understand what they had stumbled into. Kate spent days going through historical records, with serving as her guide. The crystalline scientist had become fascinated by humans and wanted to learn everything about Earth in exchange for sharing the Council's secrets. What Kate discovered changed everything. The Council had existed for over 10,000 years. It was formed during an era when the galaxy was young, and evolution was still experimenting with different forms of life. Species that evolved on harsh worlds developed differently than those from gentle planets. They were stronger and more aggressive and better at surviving when things went wrong. At first, this did not matter. The galaxy was large enough for everyone. Species kept to their territories and species from softer worlds kept to theirs. But then the Soft World Alliance was formed. Species from gentle planets had evolved toward cooperation rather than competition. They worked together naturally, sharing resources and technology without the constant fighting that plagued civilizations. This gave them an advantage. While species spent their energy fighting each other, the alliance grew stronger and larger with each passing century. Eventually, the alliance decided that species were a threat to galactic peace. Their violent nature made them dangerous. Their powerful bodies made them unpredictable. The alliance began a campaign to contain them. At first, containment meant trade restrictions and travel bans. Then it meant blockades and embargoes. Then it meant sterilization programs designed to reduce populations over generations. The Alliance called these programs humanitarian efforts meant to help dangerous species evolve into more peaceful forms. The species called it genocide. The Council was formed as a response. Representatives from the harshest worlds in the galaxy came together for the first time in history. They agreed to share information and coordinate defense against the Alliance's expansion. It was the only way to survive. But they were losing. Jack called a meeting with his crew after Kate shared what she had learned. They gathered in the quarters they had been given and tried to make sense of their situation. Lieutenant Laura had spent her time studying the Council's military records. She was a tactical analyst by training, and she had noticed something that disturbed her. The Council's member species were powerful individually, but they were terrible at working together. Each species fought its own wars using its own methods. There was no coordination, no shared command structure, no combined operations of any kind. Laura pulled up a holographic display showing recent engagements between Council forces and Alliance fleets. The results were consistently bad. Council warriors would charge into battle seeking individual glory, while Alliance ships worked together in precise formations. Superior numbers and coordination beat raw power almost every time. Jack asked why the Council had not addressed this obvious weakness. Kate answered based on what had told her. Species were predators by nature. They did not cooperate well because their instincts told them that other beings were either prey or competitors. Working together in large groups went against millions of years of evolution. They had tried to coordinate in the past, but it always fell apart when the fighting started. Made a comment that changed the direction of their conversation. He said that humans were predators too, but they had learned to cooperate. He pointed out that human civilization was built on cooperation. Cities and nations and armies all required people to work together toward common goals. It was not natural for humans either, but they had figured it out anyway. The room went quiet as everyone processed what that meant. Laura spoke next. She said that human military history was essentially a long lesson in how to make large groups of violent individuals work together effectively. Formations and ranks and chains of command were all tools designed to channel individual aggression into collective action. Humans had been refining these tools for thousands of years. Jack asked if she thought she could teach those tools to the council. Laura said she did not know, but she was willing to try. The next day, Jack requested a meeting with High Arbiter. He brought Laura with him, and they presented a simple proposal. Humanity would share its knowledge of organized warfare with the Council in exchange for full partnership status and access to Alliance territory. Listened without expression. When Jack finished, she asked what made him think human methods would work for species so different from his own. Laura answered. She explained that the principles of warfare were universal: communication, coordination, supply lines, command structures. These things did not depend on biology. They depended on discipline and training. Any species could learn them if they were willing to put aside their pride. Made a sound that the translator struggled with. It came through as something between a laugh and a growl. She said that council species had been putting aside their pride for 10,000 years, and it had never worked. Laura said that was because they had been trying to eliminate their aggressive nature instead of using it. Human armies did not suppress the violent instincts of their soldiers. They directed those instincts toward specific targets at specific times. The aggression was still there, but it was controlled, channeled, made useful. Was silent for a long time. Finally, she asked Laura to give her an example of what she meant. Laura described a basic infantry formation from human history. She explained how individual soldiers with spears could become an unstoppable force simply by standing close together and moving in unison. Each soldier protected the one next to him while attacking the enemy in front. The whole became stronger than the sum of its parts. Leaned forward with interest growing in her ancient eyes. Laura continued. She described cavalry charges and artillery barrages and naval blockades. She explained combined arms warfare where different types of units worked together to cover each other's weaknesses. She talked about supply chains and field hospitals and reserve forces. Every concept was simple on its own, but together they formed a system that could conquer worlds. When she finished, stood. She towered over the two humans, but for the first time she did not seem threatening. She seemed hopeful. She said that she needed to bring this information to the full council. She said that if humans could teach these methods, then the war against the Alliance might finally be winnable. She said that humanity might be the most important discovery the Council had made in 1,000 years. Jack watched her leave and felt the weight of what they had just started. They had come to this station by accident looking only to survive. Now they were about to change the course of a galactic war. He hoped they were ready for what came next. 6 months had passed since the Horizon's Edge had stumbled into the Council station. In that time, everything had changed. Laura had become the most requested instructor on the station. Species that had fought each other for generations now sat together in her training sessions, learning how to work as units instead of individuals. It was not easy. Thousands of years of instinct could not be erased in weeks, but progress was being made. The first breakthrough came when a combined force of 3 different species successfully defended a mining outpost against an Alliance patrol. It was a small victory, but it was also the first time Council forces had ever coordinated effectively in actual combat. News of the success spread through the station like fire. Kate Bradley had developed a common communication protocol that allowed different species to share tactical information in real time. Her system used simple symbols and tones that could be understood regardless of language or biology. It was not elegant, but it worked. Danny Price had been working with council engineers to standardize ship designs. The current fleet was a mess of different technologies that could barely communicate with each other, let alone fight together. Danny proposed a modular system where ships from different species could share power and weapons and shields. The engineers resisted at first, but results from simulations eventually convinced them. Cole established the first medical corps. She trained doctors from a dozen different species to treat injuries across biological boundaries. When a warrior fell in battle, it no longer mattered what species had caused the wound or what species needed to heal it. Someone would know how to help. Ben Carter had recovered fully and now served as the head of a new training program for close combat specialists. His victory over had earned him respect that transcended species boundaries. Warriors who would never have listened to a soft creature before now hung on his every word. Jack spent his time in meetings. Endless meetings with council representatives discussing strategy and resources and politics. He learned that the council was far more fractured than it appeared. Old grudges ran deep, and some species had been feuding for longer than humans had existed as a civilization. But slowly things began to change. The human approach was working, not because it was brilliant but because it was practical. Humans did not care about ancient feuds or territorial disputes. They cared about winning, and winning required cooperation. On the day that marked 6 months since their arrival, the crew of the Horizon's Edge was summoned to the main council chamber. Jack walked through those massive doors, remembering the first time he had seen this room. Back then, they had been intruders waiting to be executed. Now they were something else entirely. The chamber was packed with representatives from every member species. Was there sitting with his delegation. He nodded at Ben as the humans passed, and there was respect in the gesture. Their fight had created an unlikely bond between them. High Arbiter rose to address the assembly. She spoke about the changes of the past 6 months. She described the victories and the progress and the hope that had returned to species who had been losing for generations. She gave credit to the human crew who had made it all possible. Then she announced her retirement. The chamber erupted in surprised sounds from dozens of different species. Had led the council for 300 cycles. Her wisdom and strength had held the Alliance together through its darkest times. The idea of the council without her seemed impossible. Waited for quiet before continuing. She explained that she had led during an era of survival, hiding and defending and simply trying to hold on. That era was ending. A new age was beginning and it required new leadership. She said that a vote had been conducted among the senior representatives. The results were unanimous for the first time in the council's history. She looked directly at Jack. Jack felt his stomach drop. He understood what was about to happen and he wanted to stop it. He stepped forward and tried to speak, but raised a limb to silence him. She said that the council did not need another warrior. They had plenty of those. They did not need a scientist or a diplomat either. What they needed was a species that understood how to unite. A species that could take individuals from different worlds with different bodies and different instincts and turn them into something greater. She said that Earth would lead the council into whatever future awaited them. The title of High Commander was offered not just to Jack, but to humanity as a whole. Earth would have a permanent seat at the head of the council with authority over military operations and strategic planning. In exchange, humans would commit to the war against the Alliance and bring everything they had learned about cooperation and warfare to the fight. Jack looked at his crew. Kate was trying not to cry. Danny was grinning like he had just won a lottery, stood at attention like the soldier he had always been, was holding Ben's hand and neither of them seemed to notice. Laura was already making notes about resource allocation and force deployment. Jack turned back to face the chamber. Thousands of eyes from dozens of species waited for his response. 6 months ago, these beings had wanted to kill him. Now they were asking him to lead them. He thought about Earth, about the billions of people who had no idea what was happening out here in the dark between stars, about the wars humans had fought against each other, and the peace they had sometimes managed to build, about everything his species had survived and everything they had become. He accepted the title. The chamber filled with sounds that the translator interpreted as approval and celebration. Representatives who had never spoken to each other began planning together. Old enemies shook hands or claws or tentacles for the first time. Something that had seemed impossible was becoming real. Later that night, the crew gathered on the observation deck of their ship. The station spread out below them, glowing with lights from 100 different civilizations. Beyond it, the stars stretched forever in every direction. Kate said that she still could not believe what had happened. She said that they had come out here looking for new trade routes, and instead they had started a revolution. Ben laughed and said that it was typical. Humans could not go anywhere without changing things. Laura said that the real work was just beginning. The alliance was vast and powerful, and they would not give up their dominance without a fight. The war ahead would be long and difficult. Jack nodded. He said that Laura was right, but he also said that he had faith, not in himself or even in humanity alone. He had faith in what they could build together with their new allies, different species, different worlds, different ways of thinking, all of it combined into something the galaxy had never seen before. He said that they had crashed the council by accident. They were leaving as its leaders on purpose, and whatever came next, they would face it together. The stars did not answer, but they seemed to shine a little brighter. Raised a cup of something that had assured him was safe for human consumption. He proposed a toast to humanity, to the council, to the future they were about to build. Everyone drank. And somewhere in the vastness of space, the Soft World Alliance received reports about a new species that had taken command of their oldest enemy. They did not yet understand what it meant, but they would. The galaxy would never be the same.